Hello YouTube, Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter based in Southeast London, and I am also a guitar tutor. And today I'm very excited to be introducing and starting my YouTube series all about practical guitar and also guitar theory and songwriting and things like that. And I spent some time thinking about what I wanted to talk about in this first video, and it occurred to me that if you were really starting from a beginner's standpoint and you really had no idea anything about the instrument at all, you would really need to learn guitar anatomy first, which sounds a little bit boring, but I promise that it will be interesting and engaging, and it will be invaluable. Once you know all about guitar anatomy, you'll be able to act with more confidence on the instrument, and especially if you run into issues and you need to get them fixed or seen to or anything like that, you'll be able to say, well, there's something wrong with this part, and you can say, well, that's the saddle or something like that. So originally I'd planned to make this video a little bit shorter. I really do want to make the videos in this series, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes long. I want them to be really accessible, very short, but this video in particular is going to be longer. And the reason is because I could tell you the names of every part of the instrument, but really what you need to know is what the parts of the instrument actually do. What's the point of them? What's the purpose of them? And as I go through each of the parts, one thing that you should consider is that actually the quality and the actual material of the part that we're talking about oftentimes has alternatives. You can upgrade. You can upgrade this part or that part, or any part of the instrument can be upgraded. And when you do that, actually, you end up improving the quality or the sound of the guitar or its function, how easy it is to actually use. And so because of that, I think it's worth considering that when you're buying a guitar or things like that, that the anatomy of the instrument can be important, what actually the instrument is made out of. And oftentimes, especially with guitars, usually quality is almost always directly correlated with the value. So if something's expensive, you usually get what you pay for. And similarly, if it didn't cost too much, then yeah, you might not expect the most. Now, that said, I think that classical guitars, this is a classical guitar, is undervalued. I think classical guitars usually are bought as student instruments, and then sometimes people don't pick up the instrument or it can get too complicated. And then because of that, they appear on the secondhand market. I bought this instrument, a Raimundo factory-built Spanish-made guitar. It's the model 112. It has a solid top, which is usually a very good sign. And it costs £78. So I think I found a really good deal. But to be honest, I think I see deals like that all the time. And I did play this guitar before buying it. And that said, I would recommend that, you know, if you're interested in buying a guitar, I'll do a checklist video separate to this. But you should always try the instrument before you actually buy it. All that said, I just want to say thank you to the people that do subscribe to the channel. If you do like this video, please consider liking the video and also consider subscribing if you are interested in the video series. It will absolutely motivate me to continue making content. All of that out of the way, let's get into the anatomy of the guitar. So I mentioned that I was playing a classical guitar. This is a classical guitar. And there are a few distinctions between this and an electric or an acoustic guitar. But for the most part, all the parts are pretty similar. And I might even do a separate video all about electric guitar just because it can get a little bit more complicated because it actually has pickups. But speaking of classical and acoustic guitars, the first thing I want to look at is the headstock. The headstock is over here. So I just want to bring this a little bit closer so you can get a better look. And you can hopefully see that there's quite a few different things to look at. Now, admittedly, a lot of these parts are basically repetitions. They're sort of the same thing. But just looking here at this part, right? Here we can see a very specific kind of thing going on. We have these kind of keys. These are called tuning keys. And these are attached to this gear. And all of these sort of operate in the same way. You can turn them one way or the other, and when you turn them, that gear will move. And I know it looks like it's moving slowly, but it will move. And when it moves, that gear is connected to this, which is a tuning, I call that a tuning peg. The tuning peg, see, has a little hole in it, and that's where the strings actually are connected. So by turning this one way or another, you end up actually rotating the string. The string is a flexible material. Now on a classical guitar, it's made usually out of nylon. Nylon is sort of a type of plastic. It's a stretchy material. On acoustic guitars, you'll get steel strings, or they'll be made out of sort of combinations of metals, but still stretchy nonetheless. And that stretch is what's going to affect pitch. And I've actually tuned my guitar, well, I've tuned it out of tune. So I'm going to actually tune it, and it was actually this, the A string. So each of these sort of strings are actually tuned to a specific part. You can see here, if I just lift this up, you can see we have 6 strings. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. These are our 6 strings, and they also, if you look close, have variations in actual thickness. And that also has to do with pitch. A thicker string will produce a lower pitch. Thinner strings will produce a higher pitch. And the pitch you're hearing, what I'm describing as pitch, is actually the frequency. I can't sing that low, it's way too low for me. But it's a low E. I'll talk about tuning, like I said in another video. But for now, what you need to know is that these tuning pegs are important. They can be made out of different materials. And some of the more expensive ones actually are easier to turn. And so in some cases, again, it's worth upgrading. In fact, I would like to upgrade these to something nicer that are easier to turn. Now on the headstock, you'll also see we have this white bar. The white bar is called the nut. And the nut, just like the tuning pegs, can be made out of different materials. But if you look close, you can actually see it's a point of tension with the strings. So the strings are connected to the pegs are then touching the nut. The nut is important because the material that it's made out of is making direct contact with the string, which means it's actually helping to create part of the sound in a very small, but sometimes very meaningful way. When I play that, we're hearing the string, we're also hearing the sound of the nut. And when I hold down the string, something has changed. Something has changed because now the point of contact with the string is not actually the nut anymore. It is actually my finger. My finger is actually a material as well. It's flesh, I suppose, and it's a soft sound. And it's also worth pointing out that it's not just that that's making the contact, it's actually also the metal. Now this leads us to the section of the guitar called the neck. The neck is where you'll find all the frets and also the fret board. This is the fretboard, this whole sort of wooden area. Now the frets themselves can be complicated to describe because the bars are the frets, but so are the spaces between the bars. That is also the fret. Now for distinction purposes, I call the bars the fret bars, and the space between I call the fret. So if I say the first fret, I mean anywhere in this area. And if I say the second fret, I mean anywhere in this area. And the point of contact with the string becomes the metal fret bars. The metal fret bars, you can see they protrude from the fret board a little bit, and they're making contact with the string, and then that contact is what's changing the pitch. Now, if you also look close, you'll see that the actual space in the frets gets increasingly smaller as you go down or bigger as you go up the neck. One way or another, you can see that they're actually of varying size. And that was actually meticulously done. Someone made it, or it was factory built, or something like that. But in any case, the actual space is very carefully plotted out. That space is going to actually change the pitch by a very specific amount, which follows something called the chromatic scale, and I will talk about that in a separate video. So on the fretboard, you'll find that it's usually made out of a solid wood, either ebony or mahogany or something like that, something you can really push your fingers into day in, day out, and it will stand the test of time. And on the fretboard, you'll also find, and I should mention also the fretboard itself doesn't contribute very much to the sound. You'll find that actually, that on the actual neck, you'll sometimes see these little kind of fret inlays. The fret inlays can be very decorative, sometimes made out of things like abalone or mother of pearl, some kind of nice material that's very easy to look at, and when you look at it, you say, oh, that's beautiful. But another thing that happens is their attention grabbing. And that's actually for a very specific purpose. For guitarists, when you don't have those little fret inlays, usually located on the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th frets, usually at minimum the 5th and the 7th frets, When you don't have them, it's kind of a little bit harder to navigate the instrument. This guitar does not have the fret inlays, and on the top of the instrument, usually there will be little dots right here to indicate the 5th and 7th fret as well. You can see here I actually have a piece of tape. The piece of tape is on the 12th fret. But realistically, I had some on the 5th and 7th. That was my way of sort of cheating a little bit. But yeah, even I use them. It's not just for beginners. It really does help to section the instrument. These are the first 5 frets. These are 7 to 12. This is sort of another 5 frets. And then here we have 5 to 7. And it kind of can help to organize your playing. And they're always going to be valuable. As we continue going down the neck, though, we come to a point of contact. A point of contact where the neck meets what is called the body. This is the body of the guitar. The body of the guitar is usually made out of a variety of woods. And you can even see that. Here we have a darker wood. Here we have a little line that's something else. Here we have a lighter wood. Tons of woods going on. And the woods will contribute to sound. So something else I should just point out before moving towards the body is I just need to talk about this. This is called a Spanish heel. The Spanish heel actually serves to keep the neck straight. So over time, you got these strings, right? And they're pulling with tension. They're constantly tense, basically. Over time, when the guitar is not maintained or it's in an environment that's just not suitable, for instance, somewhere very hot or humid, the actual neck can start to curve and bend. Now, admittedly, this is a block of wood and it's very strong, but nonetheless, over time, you might start to notice some warping, some issues. The Spanish heel serves to keep the neck straight. So on a classical guitar, this is an important element. On electric guitars, you'll actually hear of something called a truss rod. The truss rod is a piece of metal that goes through the neck of the instrument, and usually using an Allen key, you can actually adjust it. So if the neck does start to do this and bend this way, you'll actually be able to correct it for the most part. So now that we've talked about the neck and we talked about the frets and the headstock, let's move forward to the body. The body of the guitar is usually, like I said, comprised of many different woods. The most important contributing factor to sound will be the top wood. Now on a classical guitar, you will want something with solid wood. You'll want usually cedar or something like spruce. These are very popular woods and they'll contribute a lot to the sound. And usually you should be able to tell what the wood is either by looking at it, usually like a darker wood like this. This is not actually cedar, but cedar would look like this. This is something called organon. And then what am I saying? Oregon pine. Organon is a song by Men I Trust. Great song though. But you also see spruce. Spruce is like almost white. So the parts on the top of the guitar, this is the soundboard or the top. Here we have the bridge. The bridge is also important, and here we have the sound hole. Let's start with the bridge. The bridge, you can see there are two things. Here's this white line, and similar, reminiscent of the nut. It serves a very similar function. Usually, a saddle can be made out of bone as well, and you can see it's a point of tension. Here you can see that I actually have a pickup installed. Unfortunately, it's not really working, but this is also part of the tie block. So this little block here, hopefully maybe that's a better view, but that little area there, this is a tie block. The tie block is exactly what you think it is. It is a block onto which you tie the strings. Classical guitar strings are basically just strings. It's like cutting a piece of twine. And in order to keep the strings from slipping, you have to tie them down to something. Now, I'll do a separate video about how to change your strings and how to install them onto a classical guitar. But on a classical guitar, you'll actually have to tie them into place. And I'll show you, if you look, hopefully you can see that these strings are actually wound. And I've taken the excess of strings and I've actually tucked them away. So that's important. Looking at how the strings are actually tied on. I will, like I said, talk about that. This is the bridge, and if you had a problem here, you could then say, this is the bridge, I have a problem there. Here you have your sound hole. Sound hole is important because it is, in fact, where the sound will project from primarily. But being an acoustic instrument, the actual guitar will project sound in every direction. So if you are standing behind me and I'm playing this way, you should still hear it really from behind me, depending on how far you are. Now, around the sound hole is something called a rosette. The rosette is not that important. It's a decorative kind of design that goes around the sound hole. Sometimes, again, can be very fancy, made with things like abalone or things like that. inside the guitar, you might sometimes see these little lines, and it's going to be kind of difficult for me to actually show them. But the brackets rather of wood underneath here, that's called the bracing. The bracing helps to keep the actual top wood from warping, but it can also contribute to the projection, the amplification of sound. Now, I mentioned that the top wood is the most important when it comes to sound quality, right? Bracing can be a factor in amplification and also sometimes sound. And then here we have the sides and the back. Now, the sides and the back are a little bit like, imagine you were in a big gym. These are the walls of the gym, and you clap, it echoes throughout those walls. So that's very important. So it won't exactly contribute hugely to the sound. Basically, you want a hardwood, but it will be important in the volume of the instrument. And admittedly, you can get solid woods. Now, top wood can be made out of a solid wood, or it can be made out of things like laminate. Laminate is when you have particles of wood that are composited together, and they can sound good, actually. But one thing to point out is that being that it's a composite of wood, it won't actually change over time. Usually it's treated with glues and resins and things that really keep it from kind of maturing, if that makes sense. And so usually when you're starting, I would recommend trying to get a solid wood. And then I think finally the last thing to mention is the waist. The waist is what it looks like. It's like a waist, as though you're holding a person. And the waist is important, and I'll try to show you really quick if I can down here. The waist makes contact with the leg, the thigh, right? And for most classical guitar players, they'll keep the guitar on their left knee. But for me, I actually don't use the waist. I use the bottom of the body to connect directly with my thigh. I'll lower just a little bit more so you can see. I find I have a lot of control like this, and it works really well. So everyone's different. And when it comes to posture, which I'll talk about in a separate video, it's important to really explore different options. I find I get on great when I keep the guitar on my knee like this. I have a lot of control, but everyone is different. So I will talk about that a little bit more in that separate video. So to conclude, we've looked at the headstock, we've looked at the body of the instrument, we talked about the neck and different components all around. You'll find that this is mostly transferable to electric guitars as well. I have my Dan Electro Mod 6 right over there. There's my acoustic Alvarez. Mostly transferable. I might do a brief video about electric guitar anatomy because there are things called pickups, little sort of microphones that are picking up the sound of the strings, and that can be a huge factor in sound as well. So that might just be a separate video. But for the most part, I feel like I've covered everything that I planned to, and I just do have so much to say about this moving forward. So if you did like this video, please consider liking the video. Also consider subscribing because it will motivate me to keep making content. And I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Ciao for now.